Good morning, everybody. This is Ed Aves. I'm the publisher of El Restaurante magazine, and I welcome all of you to our webinar today on making tortillas in-house. We have three fine panelists today, and each of them have a little bit different perspective on how they make tortillas and their businesses, and they will each share their experiences with you and answer questions. Before I introduce them, I would like to note that you are all welcome to ask questions. On your screen of the webinar, there's a panel, and you can type in your question there and submit it to me. If your screen does not show that at the moment, you'll see a little orange arrow near the top right of your screen. Click on that, and that should reveal the panel to you. You can ask questions at any time, so you don't need to wait until the end of the webinar. Go ahead and submit your questions whenever you think of them, and when the question time begins, then I will have all the questions here in front of me, and I will read them to the panelists as appropriate. Each of the three panelists will answer 5 questions that we have prepared in advance, and then we will go to the questions from the audience. Okay, so let me introduce our 3 panelists today. Shauna Page is our first panelist. She is the co-owner of Tortilla Nixtamal in New York, and also Nixtamal Taqueria. She is a professional tortilla maker and provides other restaurants with tortillas. Our second panelist is Jason Tilford, owner of Tilford Restaurant Group in St. Louis, which has the Milagro Modern Mexican Restaurant and Mission Taco Joints. And Jason has a lot of experience also in making tortillas for his restaurants in St. Louis. And our third panelist is Elizabeth Hart, owner of Sabora Me Grill in Rancho Cucamonga, California, who also makes tortillas for her restaurant and has another perspective on how that's done. So let me start my questions. I'm going to offer them to our 3 panelists in geographical order. So I'm going to start with Shauna. Shauna, are you there?
I'm here. Good morning, near afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much, Shauna. Shauna, my first question for you is when and why did you start making your own tortillas?
So it's a long story, but I will keep it to a minimum. My partner and I, Fernando, we started making tortillas. Our first tortilla came out in November of 2008. And essentially we got started. He is a firefighter in New York City, and I was a contractor, a business contractor. And at the time, the economy was low, and we had extra time on our hands. And Fernando is Mexican from Veracruz on the east coast of Mexico, and I'm a Mexican food lover. And so he one day just said, you know what, we need to start a business with making tortillas. And why tortillas? Because all the food in this wonderful city I live in, while it's the best food in the world, it has the worst Mexican food. And what he and his cousin actually kind of deduced as the common denominator is the tortillas. The tortillas were horrible in New York City. So he thought, why don't we just make tortillas for the restaurants in New York City and do it with 100% corn, just like you would do and what you would see in towns all over Mexico.
Okay, thank you very much. And what equipment do you use to make tortillas?
So we started in 2008 with a company called, at the time they were called Tour USA. I think now they're renamed Tortilla Depot or for USA United Bakery Center. I think they're a fabulous equipment company. But they introduced us to the Manufactura Linen. We use all Mexican equipment, all equipment that's from Mexico. Part of the reason we did that was we put our tortilla machine where everyone can see it. And we wanted to make sure that we were showing people that we were doing the real thing in an authentic way. And we wanted to let the Mexican community know that we were there and we were there for them. The other reason we use the Mexican equipment is because we believe it actually simply makes a better tortilla. They've been doing it, making these machines for a very long time. And I tell you what, that Manufactura Linen, we produce, it's been producing since 2008, every single day, 363 days of the year. It runs for 8 hours a day at a minimum, and it produces about a minimum of 1,500 to 3,000 tortillas a day. So and it keeps chugging. We do have another machine that we purchased through Celorio, another Mexican tortilla machine manufacturer. It is a double-headed. It pushes out 2 tortillas at a time. It is also a very good machine. But they don't have as good of a process of getting equipment into the United States as the Toyo USA, the linen manufacturer's linen machine does. And I find that they both work equally well.
Okay, great. And tell us about your supplies, your corn and other ingredients that you need. What do you use, and where do you source them?
Mm-hmm. So we are, as is the name, Tortilla Nixtamal, we are 100% corn. We do not use any corn flour or any preservatives of any kind. So we get all of our corn and from 2 locations. One is domestic. We buy our corn from Rovi Seed. Rovi Seed is a farm up in Farmersville, Illinois. Rovi's had that farm for more than 80 years, and we find that they supply one of, if not the best, corn for making tortillas. The way it absorbs the calcium hydroxide, the way it absorbs and makes nixtamal, it is a very high quality corn. They also have a special process they go through that makes sure any corn that's gone into more of a silage or a molded state are removed. You only get the best and prettiest kernels. And for the 10 years that we've been doing business with them, we've never had any problems with our corn. We get a domestic white corn from them as well as an organic blue corn. We also have been supplying for the past few years Mexican corn, which is from the company called Macienda. Macienda specializes in working with Mexican farmers and working as a co-op with them to then help them grow and establish their farms and take their surplus corn and take it into the United States, where they sell it to people like myself and to people on the call who are interested in making real tortillas like you would have in Mexico. And the difference between the 2 types of corns, just simply speaking, is if you think about the starch in the corn and the seed of the corn, the Mexican corn has a very soft cornstarch simply because of the environment in which it's being grown, and the Rovi seed, the domestic corn, tends to have a hardier starch because it grows in a more harsh environment, and that when it comes out in the tortilla, the masa, you will get a softer masa with the Macienda or the Mexican corn than you will with the domestic. Both of them are soft, but just relatively speaking, that's kind of the difference that you see.
And Shauna, maybe you could briefly explain for our attendees who don't know the process, but what are the steps required if one wants to make tortillas directly from the raw ingredients like you are?
So It's simple, but hard. So it's a very simple process, which is why we got into it, because we said, how hard could it possibly be? Um, the ingredients are simply corn. You want, any corn will do, but not necessarily, because some corn will absorb the water and the solution better than others. It's kind of an experiment that one might want to take, and I can go into that more deeply if people are interested. But you take the corn, the dry corn, you heat up water to 200 degrees. You add that dry corn and you add some calcium hydroxide. And you want the calcium hydroxide that's for food processing. You can also use calcium hydroxide that people use for pickling, but it tends to be much more strong, so you want one just for food processing. And just the water, the calcium hydroxide, and the corn, you steep that in 200-degree water for about 12 hours. And after that 12 hours, the dry corn will have absorbed the majority of the water solution, and the corn will be soft. And at that point, it'll still be a little hard, but it'll be softer, so you can at least break through it. At that point, you will grind it. We use a big industrial grinder. You could also use a meat grinder, a food grinder, or a food processor. And when you're grinding, add just a little bit of water, and then your masa comes out. Your dough comes out, and then from that dough, you just press the perfect tortilla to the size you want, put it on your plancha, on your grill, heat it up, and there's your tortilla.
Okay, great, fascinating. And that kind of leads to the next question, and that is, what kind of training or education did you require to be able to do this?
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, it's a very simplistic process. So, as many people do, they get into something and say, oh, well, how hard could it be? It's only this. So our initial training was visiting Mexico, visiting tortillas that were there. You can find them everywhere. Going to a couple of plants to see how they were set up. And then trying it. We read some stuff on the internet, so recipes, and I'm an educated academic person, so I figured, if I read about it, I can. And my grandma always said, if you can read, you can cook. So I figured it applied to making tortillas as well. So that's what we did. But the truth is, there was a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of learning curves that happened throughout. So once you think you have it right, the weather would change. It would get colder. You would have to cook it slightly differently because the weather on the ambient temperature outside was a little bit different. Or you were making 100 pounds a day and now you're making 1,000 pounds a day. So how do you change your cooking pattern and your processing of the corn? So it's been a combination of continual reading, continual visits to Mexico, and people that have been doing this for years, and trial and error. As we learn more and we get more feedback from our customers, we're constantly, I still don't think I figured it out. I still think we still have some learning to do, and especially because our product is all natural. And when you put preservatives in something, you can kind of fake it, because the preservatives will mask what you mess up. But when you're making an all-natural thing, it doesn't always work that way.
Interesting. And Shauna, the last question, what is one thing or maybe a couple of things that you wish you knew before you started making tortillas?
So, looking back, you would do everything different. I think hindsight is 2020. I'll answer this from a couple different perspectives. One, I am a wholesale manufacturer, and I know a lot of people on the phone are more independent restaurants, but as a wholesale manufacturer, someone who has a large tortilla machine, One thing I wish I would have understood more was how you fit a Mexican-made product into an American establishment, especially in New York City, where the regulations are very strict. We had several problems with the gas connections and pushing out too much carbon monoxide, and how do we get things NSF certified. And I know that Tour USA has done a lot since we first started with them 10 years ago to be able to do all that in-house before they deliver anything to an establishment. So if I had known more, if I knew one thing, it would be how do you pair up a machine with the internal requirements of your city, of your location, of the gas needs. And we're just lucky my uncle was a mechanic, because every machine needs a good mechanic. It doesn't have to be a tortilla mechanic, but it needs to be a mechanic, a machinist, if anything. And then the other thing I wish I would have known now, then what I know now is how much weather affects tortilla production. So you kind of think of tortillas as just being a simple product, as I've spoken about, but we live in New York, and the weather here is hot and humid in the summertime, a little bit of perfect weather in the spring and the fall, followed by very cold and wet weather in the wintertime. And this affects the processing of tortillas quite a bit. I think that's the case if you're making it on a big scale or if you're making it on a small scale. So when you're making nixtamal tortillas, it's very important. I always kind of liken it to Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Goldilocks didn't want the bed too hard, didn't want the bed too soft, wanted it just right. Nixtamal tortillas are the same way. They need to be cooked just perfectly. They need to be ground with just the right amount of water, and they need to be cooked at just the right temperature. And I'm sure Elizabeth and Jason can speak to that as well. And I wish I would have known more about that when I got started, because there was a lot of mistakes we made along the way.
Great. Thank you very much, Shauna.
Thank you.
Attendees, before we go to the next speaker, I'd like to remind you that you can ask questions at any time using the questions panel on your screen. And if that panel is not obvious to you, you click on that little orange arrow in a box, and that should reveal the panel to you. A quick comment on equipment. As Shauna mentioned, she is a wholesale manufacturer, so she uses large equipment. There is also very good quality restaurant size equipment made in the United States. Besco, for example, is one manufacturer. You can see ads for several of these companies in any edition of El Restaurante magazine or on our website, elrestaurante.com. Okay, now I will move on to our second panelist, Jason Tilford. Jason, are you there?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for joining us. Jason, you have been making tortillas for your restaurants in St. Louis for a while. Tell us about when you started and why did you start making your own tortillas?
Sure. So we actually started making tortillas in 2004, but at that time we were using maseca corn flour, and we just had a little taqueria shop in a little neighborhood, and then we started opening Mission Taco Joint in about 2013, and then in 2014 we decided to start cooking corn. And it's funny, we decided to because we saw a piece on Food Network with Shauna and her tortilla nixtamal. And my wife said, "That is so cool. You should do that." I was like, "There's no way we're going to do that. It's impossible." And here we are now. We do it for 5 restaurants in St. Louis, and it's been a neat experience.
That's great. And with 5 restaurants, how many tortillas are you producing daily?
So we cook the corn and make the masa in a little commissary, and we ship it to each restaurant. Each restaurant makes their own, and they probably make about busy day about 2,000 tortillas a day.
Great. So you've got a commissary and restaurants individually making the tortillas. What equipment do you need for each?
So in the commissary, we have a big corn cooker. Then we, cook it overnight, just how Shauna was explaining the process. And we send it up through an auger, goes in the grinder, comes out. We add a little water, like Shauna does, comes out nice soft masa, and we pack that into tubs and ship it out to the restaurants. And we keep a little here, and we make it here for the food truck. But all the rest goes out to the restaurants. And at the restaurants, we have a Lennon hand tortilla roller. So we do them all by hand, not machine.
Great. And how quickly can you make tortillas? Is it something that you do like in the morning all at once, or do you do them during the course of the day?
Yeah, no, they'll do them throughout the day. They'll do them before each meal period, and then as they run out, we try to keep them very fresh. So they'll roll them and cook them and put them right on the line. So pretty much right when they cook them, you get them.
Got it. Great. What about the supplies, the corn? Where do you get that?
Um, so we actually get it from Roe v. Seed as well. And we heard about Roe v. Seed and Shauna's piece on Food Network. And it's ironically, it's only an hour and a half away from here in Farmersville, Illinois. And we went out there and visited with the farmer, Derek. Took a little tour of his farm, and we're very impressed. And yeah, so we use Roe v. Seed. We use a combination of white and yellow corn.
Okay. Now, there is also the other ingredient that you need to use for the nixtamalization, right? Where do you get that? That's lime, the calcium?
Yeah, we get it. Yeah, it is like calcium. We get it from Rovi as well.
Oh, okay. Got it. Great.
And then water. And we don't use any preservatives or anything either. We grind every day.
Okay. And tell us about what kind of training or education did you have to get in order to get into tortilla making?
So when we first decided we wanted to give this a shot, we hooked up with a guy named Guillermo in Chicago, and we got him through the equipment we were going to buy. We were going to buy it through him. So we went up to Chicago and visited a couple masa places, tortillerias in Chicago. And then we went to one in Kansas City as well, which is close to St. Louis, and kind of just like saw a bunch of different scales of volume masa manufacturers, and we kind of just gauged where we were going to be. A lot of trial and error, and so we started in 2014. And last year, we actually, instead of doing it all ourselves, we stood ourselves. We hired a gentleman from Mexico that has a tortilleria in Monterrey, Mexico, and he kind of does everything now. He cooks it, he grinds it, he goes to the restaurant to make sure all the tortillas are nice, up to par, make sure the machines are all set in the right settings, and he's really been a big help for us.
Great. That kind of leads to a question that was not on the list that we discussed earlier, Jason, but what do you think that having those tortillas made by your own restaurants, how does that affect your business? How does that help business? What do customers think about that?
So it's very unique in St. Louis. We're the only place in St. Louis that does this. And it's just, as anyone that's ever had a fresh tortilla could tell you, it makes the taco 100 times better. You can taste actual corn. It's nice, and we can adjust how elastic and how firm the tortilla is, so we make it a good mouth feel, a good tooth feel, and we control all that, so it just makes the tacos great. And it kind of goes unsaid that people eat the tacos, they love them. They never really say it's got to be the tortilla. They're focused on the ingredients and stuff, so it's kind of just a little, special touch.
Got it. Great. And last question for you, Jason. What's one thing you wish you knew before you started making tortillas?
So when we first started, we kind of had a recipe, and we thought that's how it was always going to be. But like Shauna said, different things like the weather and the humidity and stuff really affected us. There was a lot of trial and error as well. Um, you know, we were playing around with different ways to do it, and then now that we brought Edgar in, he really has a special touch with it, and I guess maybe we is looking back if we had someone like this to start, but it was kind of fun going through the process to learn and going through the trials and errors of making masa.
Great, great. And how long would you say it took before you felt like you had a product that was ready to be served?
I'd say probably a year, a good year. Well, not to be served, but we served them and they were fine, but they kept getting better and better. Consistency was more of the thing. Occasionally we would have batches that, you know, too sticky or too dry and not fine enough, and just playing with that. And we also went from grinding about 100 pounds of corn to about 500 pounds of corn raw product. So going through that process was also learning experience.
Got it. Great. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
And our third panelist is Liz Hart from Sabora Me Grill. Liz, are you there?
Yes, I'm still.
Great. Thank you for joining us today, Liz. We appreciate it. So, Liz, tell us when and why did you start making your own tortillas for your restaurant?
Okay, I opened Saborami 8 months ago, not too long, and since the beginning, I plan to make tortillas by order because, as Jason said, it's a huge difference when you offer homemade tortillas to your customers. It's a you cannot discuss when you have a Mexican food. Has to have, for speaking about quality, has to have homemade tortillas. And yeah, in California, the competition is so hard. So pretty much every restaurant, Mexican restaurant, has homemade tortillas. So it's very hard to compete, with the other ones.
And how many tortillas would you say you make each day for your restaurant?
Well, I was telling Shauna this morning that I go by pounds. I started buying 30 to 50 pounds per week masa dough in my local supplier. But now it went up to 90 pounds per week, which is very good.
Great. And Liz, what equipment do you use to make your tortillas?
Well, you know what? My people mix that. I mean, we do it by hand. That's my point. We don't use anything, just a bowl, and we just finish our masa with a little bit more moist, warm water, and by hand we mix that, we shape it, and we finish on the tortilla press, which is wooden material.
Okay. Liz, do you also make the masa from corn, or do you buy corn flour?
I do both because nowadays people ask for gluten free. So when you make just with corn, you have the risk, the other panelists already know, that the tortilla could be a little bit drier or can be break apart. But if you use flour on that, the tortilla is more flexible, and because the gluten. So I have both. I can offer both, gluten-free or regular. And recently I found this new product that calls Naturello from Mexico through Cisco. They sell it through Cisco. It's a corn blue powder that you can mix, and it's gluten-free, no MGO, and no preservatives. It's really, really good. You can taste, the real tortilla.
Great. And Liz, tell us again the name of that product.
Naturello, Nute. Oh, I have it here. ELO. You
Okay.
can find it through Cisco. I mean, I don't know if they sell on the stores, the supermarkets.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Liz, do you also, when you're making corn tortillas, are you starting from raw corn?
No,
Or,
but because the restaurant, I have the tortillas as a complimentary. It's not, of course, in tacos. I'm trying to do it pretty much in everything that has masa dough, which is gorditas, sopes, of course, tacos and tortillas by order. But the restaurant is very new, so I decided to buy the masa from my local supply, which is Cardenas. They have a very good. I tried many others, and they have a very good mix. I've
okay.
seen mixed maseca and just water, but the maseca is a special, uh, mix that doesn't have any gluten on it and no flour, of course.
Okay. So you're using both masa that's already prepared from Cardenas
Yes.
and
And
sometimes maseca.
no, sometimes the natural that I told you.
Yes. Okay.
Translation, yeah, for blue corn tortillas.
Okay. But do you use maseca too, or are you just telling us that you were aware of that product?
I'm aware of that product. I
Okay.
believe Cardenas use it for the mix.
I see. I see. I understand. Great. Okay. All right. Thank you. So you've answered the third question already. Let me go on. What training or education did you require in order to be able to make tortillas in your restaurant?
Well, as a Mexican girl, I grew up with tortillas. In my family, we had tortillas every single day in every single meal. So when I thought about having tortillas in my restaurant, it was kind of a just automatically, like I have to have it like my house. So my grandmother used to, be our first teacher in making tortillas. So it's in my blood. I mean,
Hmm.
my skills are from my
Great.
roots.
And Liz, you mentioned to me, and please also share with our attendees, you have other employees who make the tortillas by hand, right?
Exactly. I have my crew in the kitchen is about 9, 12 people, depends of the how busy we are. But I have 3 ladies from Mexico that they are just exclusively to make tortillas. Of course, in different shifts. I have a flat top just for tortillas. My kitchen was designed um, to have just a space for tortillas. When we have big orders, we pre-made the tortillas, we partial cooked, and then we just finish on the flat top to make it, uh, soft and not too dry. I mean, the perfect tortilla.
Hmm. Perfect. Thank you. Now, Liz, you have been making tortillas your whole life.
Yeah.
So let me revise the last question a little bit. What do you wish you had known before you started making tortillas in your restaurant? Was there one or two things you wish you had known before you started making tortillas in your restaurant?
Well, as Shana mentioned something about the gas company and the supplier, I wish I could practice more on the flat top because it's never been the same, the commercial equipment versus your house, the comal. It never been the same.
Mhm.
So when we started, we were, trying and have some mistakes and waste some masa because I'm talking about the gas company because I didn't have the gas on time. So I just opened the door to the restaurant and I started making tortillas, of course, and the rest of the food. But I didn't have time to practice on that commercial equipment.
Mhm.
But now it's kind of a piece of cake.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Liz. And thank you all panelists. Now, attendees, we do have a number of questions that I will start reading and directing at certain panelists. But if you have other questions, by all means, send them in and we will get to them. If we run out of time, we will ask that you email your question to me if it was not answered, and then I will direct it to the appropriate panelist and will email back the answers. But let me take this first question, and I would like to direct this question first to Jason. Jason, this attendee asks, does it make sense for a high volume Mexican restaurant to make their own tortillas if it's only 15% of the business? And Jason, you answered that question a little bit during your presentation, but tell us a little bit more. Does it make sense for a high volume restaurant to make their own?
I mean, as a chef, food quality is number one, and I would say absolutely. If you have the space for the equipment and you have the capacity, absolutely. Maybe that 15% would go to 20. But there's nothing like a fresh nixtamal tortilla, in my opinion.
Okay. And Liz, can you reply to that question too? Do you feel that it makes sense for you to make your own?
I
Or why does
agree.
it make sense?
I agree. When you serve your basket with fresh tortillas, you immediately notice that people mood is changed. Like, oh wow, fresh tortillas. They don't expect to have it. It's kind of a plus.
Great, thank you. Another question related to that, this attendee asks, does it make sense to buy masa and press our own tortillas, or am I just as well to buy them from a local tortilla company? And so I think this speaks to that same question, but let me direct this question to Liz, because Liz, I'm sure near you there are local tortilla companies that make tortillas freshly every day. Do you think that it makes sense sometimes to buy from them, or is it always better to make your own?
As Jason mentioned it, I think it's always better to make your own because that is kind of a signature in Mexican food. It's kind of a margarita. You cannot have a taco without a margarita. So you cannot have a taco without a homemade tortilla. I mean, it makes a huge, huge difference.
Great, thank you. Okay, yes.
I just want to just add to that. So this is Shauna with we make both masa and tortillas fresh. I always tell clients, if you can make your tortilla in-house with masa, it's always better. A fresh pressed tortilla, even though it's exactly the same ingredients as what comes off of my machine, it's always better. It always tastes better. It always gives a better experience. But depending on your cost, depending on your processes in-house, depending on how big your area is for putting something like that in, a fresh tortilla, if you have a tortilleria in your town or your city, then having them make fresh tortillas and delivering them that day is equally as good as a fresh pressed masa tortilla. That is different from buying a package of tortillas with preservatives in it that can sit in your case for a week. Those are not fresh tortillas. That's different. So in definitely masa in-house production or your own fresh tortillas are the best.
And also, can I add something to that?
Sure.
It depends on your dish. Of course, you cannot press masa, make tortillas if you're gonna cook enchiladas. You cannot roll it because no matter how thin you wanna make it, you cannot roll it. So in that case, as Shana said, you can use fresh tortillas pre-made, from her tortilleria. But for example, if you want to make sopes or gorditas, you have to shape the masa in order to, to have a good product. You cannot reshape, let's put it like that, pre-made tortilla.
So in that case, you're saying you need to use masa, fresh
Correct.
masa.
Correct.
Okay, great point. Thank you. Okay, let me go to another question. Can you recommend a tortilla machine to fit in a small space? And let me answer that. I know that Tortilla Depot makes a small machine and that fits on a tabletop. There are other suppliers that make restaurant-sized machines. As I mentioned, Besco does so, and Duchess, and several other companies. And you can see these companies in any edition of El Restaurante magazine and also on our website, elrestaurante.com. So yes, there are suppliers, companies making nice restaurant-sized tortilla machines. The next question, can you spell out the name of the seed supplier? Yes, both Jason and Shauna supply their seeds from Rovi Seed, and that is spelled R-O-V as in Victor, E-Y, Rovi Seed. Okay, here's a good question, and I think I would like to direct this question at Liz. Liz, how does masa prepared for tamales differ from masa used for tortillas?
Okay, we're talking about savory tamales. The difference is the lard. You have to add lard to the masa. And of course, if we're talking about sweet tamales, you have to add the flavor, strawberry, pineapple, even chocolate. But the tamale masa is more moist and kind of because you mix with lard. So it's a huge difference. The other masa, the tortilla masa, my other the panelists can tell it. It's just with water. You add water. That's the only moist agent that you add.
And Liz, at what point? Go ahead, Shauna, please.
I was going to say, from a grinding perspective, the masa, so you use the same nixtamal, but when you grind the masa for tortillas, you grind it very fine. And if you grind masa for tamales, you grind it more coarse. And therefore, when it's more coarse, it holds and cooks with the lard a little bit better, differently. It doesn't get as heavy. It can be a little bit lighter.
Excellent. Thank you, Shauna. And Shauna or Liz, tell me, at what stage do you add the lard if you're making tamales?
Go ahead, Liz.
Oh, okay. I was waiting for you. Well, the same time that you add water, it depends if you're using maseca. There is a special maseca for tamales. The package said for tamales. So as Shana mentioned, the powder is a little bit more coarse, and you add, of course, water. It's not just lard to make it lighter or heavier, whatever is your preferences, and also the lard, already melted.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do the same. We do the same thing. So we always add we use masa, only masa, the dough, and we will add a broth or water, but usually a broth until it gets to a consistency of almost like a sticky or a little runny peanut butter, and then we add the lard. So the lard is kind of the topping off, and I think the way Elizabeth explains it's the same way. First you add a broth or a water, and then you add the lard after you get the right consistency that you want, because all the lard does is gives it that nice buttery greasy, perfect tasting feel.
Yeah. Delicious tamal.
Shauna, you said you add broth, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And is it chicken broth or beef broth or what?
Well, you can do any kind. So I prefer pork broth because I think it gives a better flavor with the corn masa. But what I tell people is whatever you are cooking to put into your tamal, just use that broth. So if you're using beef, use a beef broth based on however you're cooking your or stewing your beef. Pork the same way, chicken the same way. And some people make vegetarian or vegan, and they'll use a vegetable broth, which works. And I think the critical part with the broth is that it has some salt in it already, and it has some flavors that the corn, the masa, the natural corn likes to absorb, and it just enhances the flavor of the tamal. But like I said, I like pork, but typically we use chicken because it's often easiest to make a chicken broth of everything.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question was, Liz, can you repeat the name of that Cisco product that you use?
Yeah, it's Naturello. Naturelo.
Okay, thank you. Naturelo. Great,
Yes.
thank you. Okay. Okay, Liz, here's another question for you.
Okay.
It says, Liz, do you season the prepared masa that you receive?
No. No, because the tortilla, in my opinion, has to have a corn flavor. So I don't add any salt, pepper, nothing. Of course, as I said before, I try different suppliers and I just end up with cardinas. They sell tortillas, of course. There is a department that's a tortilleria, and they sell masa for tamales and masa for tortillas. So they don't add anything, just water and of course those machines that Shona knows to mix everything. But no, nothing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have another question. I'm going to direct this at Jason, though I'm not sure he can answer it. The question is, Jason, the attendee is asking, what is the trend for corn versus flour tortillas? Do you serve any flour tortillas in your restaurant?
Well, we do one taco on flour tortilla. I would say the trend is going more towards corn because it's obviously more traditional in Mexico, in the southern parts. And the gluten-free thing has got America going crazy. So it just seems like everybody's more inclined to go with the corn. I mean, for me, it's just a much better flavor as well. Flour doesn't really have much flavor at all.
Okay, thank you. And Liz, I know you serve both flour and corn tortillas, correct?
That's correct. But yeah, same thing. I don't move too much the flour because I promoted my place as an authentic and central and southern Mexican food. So in that regions of Mexico, we don't have flour tortillas. Flour tortillas are from I'm from north of Mexico, Sonora, Sinaloa. So I have it, but it's rarely people that ask for it. Just the kids, you know.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, here's another question. I'm going to rephrase this question a little bit, and I'm going to start with Jason on this question. Can the fresh tortillas be used in enchiladas?
Absolutely. Fresh tortillas can be used in anything. a lot more versatile than store-bought ones. Like Liz said, when you're trying to make gorditas and stuff, you can't do that with the store-bought one. At Milagro, we do our enchiladas out of fresh corn. We actually roll them a little bit thinner than a taco because we don't want too much of the tortilla in the enchilada, but we roll them a little bit thinner, and they come out great.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question, I'm going to direct this one at Liz. Liz, does the flavor for tamale masa change if one uses vegetable oil instead of lard?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I cannot define how it tastes, but you can tell it. It's more like the lard because it's pork, of course. We don't use synthetic. It's the real one. Could be from the bacon when we cook them. We serve or we the lard from that. So if you want kind of a smoky flavor on your tamales, but yeah, absolutely, it's completely different.
Okay, thank you. We have a note here from an attendee who noted that I actually gave the wrong name for that tabletop tortilla machine. It's from Tortilla Masters, not Tortilla Depot. Thank you very much for telling me that, just so you know it. Okay. That really comes to the end of our questions. Unless attendees have any others, please feel free to send some in. Let me just go back very quickly and ask each of the three panelists to tell us what you see as going forward. Are tortillas freshly made going to be a trend for the future? Are more restaurants and more customers asking for that? Shauna, what's your experience?
Well, my hope is yes, since my business is built around it. But I believe, like Jason said, there's two things that are happening. Three things. One is the gluten craze. Everybody's looking for substitutes for sandwiches, let alone tacos, for getting away from gluten. And so I think corn tortillas are becoming a natural substitution. I think also people are looking to be more healthy, and instead of dieting, they're moving towards non-processed foods, so things that don't have preservatives in them. So they're looking for more all natural. And I think, again, corn tortillas, I think more and more people are creating tortillas that are all natural. And if they have preservatives, they're very minimal, like Elizabeth was talking about what she gets out of Mexico. And then third, I think that the more education people get around, especially Americans, that Mexican food is predominantly based on corn tortillas, not flour tortillas, which was really like Elizabeth said, the North Mexico, Texas craze that then infiltrated the Southwest eating that we know and are familiar with in the United States. I think as people learn that the corn tortilla not only is more traditional Mexican, but it has great flavor if it's used properly. I think more and more people are moving in that direction. I know the chefs that I work with, I do work with a lot of high-end, big-name chefs, and so they're always looking for the best, but also the people that are starting up what they will call in New York City. We're going to teach New Yorkers what real tacos are. Everyone says the same thing, but they all say it starts with the corn tortilla. So I think that it's becoming more and more a way that people talk about Mexican food.
Great, thank you. Let me add one thing though. If your restaurant serves flour tortillas, there are good sources of equipment and supplies for flour tortillas as well. For example, the Besco machine that makes flour tortillas, it creates a very attractive visual enhancement in your restaurant if you have that flour tortilla machine going. So if you are predominantly using flour, don't feel that making tortillas in-house is out of reach, because that is an option. Jason, what do you see as trends coming down the line in tortilla
Well,
making?
I agree with everything Shauna said. And years ago, this Tex-Mex thing kind of gave Americans a weird thought of what Mexican food was, and I think slowly recently it's getting more towards traditional Mexican food and not this Tex-Mex Americanized version of it, which is good to see. That's what we like to brag about in Milagro. And there's other restaurants doing that. They're called modern Mexican or whatever you want to call it, but it's really traditional Mexican food. And that being the case, corn tortillas are, predominant in that cuisine. And then the more and more people that start making the fresh corn tortillas and realize how much better they are, because the difference is, you can't even put the words, the difference, the smell and the taste and the feel of a homemade tortilla. I think that the trend will start going that way more so.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple other questions that came in. Let me jump onto these real quick. Let me direct this question first to Liz, because Liz is working with a local supplier. What about cost? How does making them in-house compare to purchasing pre-made tortillas? Liz, do you have a feeling about that?
Well, I'm located in a very, I don't want to say rich or wealthy, but very good area. So my prices on the menu are kind of a little bit more higher than the other ones, and I can afford, to have people. It's not the cost of the masa or the time that I spend to buy it uh, 3 times a week. It's the pay to the labor cost. So that is could be, because I just have one person exclusively to make tortillas all day. But yeah, I already did my food cost and it is worth it.
Okay.
But yeah.
So it probably, if you calculate the labor, it probably costs more to make them in-house than to buy pre-made. Would you say that's correct, Liz?
That's correct. And also, of course, you have to control the portions. It's 3 tortillas per order. And if my customer wants another order, we charge it extra, of course, because it's not from the package. They make it right away.
Right. Jason, do you have any feeling for cost versus pre-made tortillas?
Yeah, so the actual cost of the tortilla is way, way cheaper. We calculate ours to be about 2 cents a tortilla. But of course, like Liz said, someone has to make them, and we have to cook the corn and grind it, and that takes space and all that stuff. But the actual head-to-head cost of the tortilla, homemade, it's really cheap. You buy the corn; it's just seed corn, and it almost doubles in size if you cook it, and then you grind it. It's pretty cheap. So yeah, it's cheaper to use the homemade one outside of the labor.
Shauna, I think you might have a good perspective on this too. And we have just 1 minute left. Can you tell us quickly, you use your own tortillas in your own taqueria, but of course you also sell them to other restaurants. Can you give us a feeling on the cost perspective?
Yeah, I think this is one of the number one questions that people have between buying a prepackaged product that has preservatives in it versus a fresh product, or making it in-house with the masa. We find that the cost difference is like about 5 cents when you're using masa per tortilla. And when you add the labor, what I find is that my clients say they are able to find other uses for that labor as well, and therefore are able to justify the cost. Not very frequently does someone just make tortillas all day. They will do something else. So in that way, the value added for having a fresh, all-natural product made in-house far outweighs any pennies that you'll be weighing between whether you want a pre-bought or a fresh product.
Okay, great.
I agree with that.
All right. Well,
I gotta go down there and meet you.
We are out of time, but thank you very much, Shauna, Jason, and Liz, for your time this morning. The information you have provided is very useful. And thank you very much, attendees, for joining us this morning. Please pay attention to El Restaurante magazine for future webinars. We try to hold 2 or 3 webinars each year. I'd also like to thank the Tortilla Industry Association, TIA, for their help and support on this webinar. This webinar has been recorded and it will be posted on the El Restaurante website. So if you would like to listen to it again, it will be available there very soon. And last, if you have any other questions that weren't answered today, please email them to me. My email is edavis, EDAVIS, at restmex.com. That's RESTMEX.com. And we are done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ed.